Good afternoon and welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of the nationalpulse.com, and we're doing something a little bit different, as you can see today, in the interests of making sure that people get to spend as much time as they possibly can unwinding from this hell of a year and spending time with their families if they can. I am coming to you live from home today, so I hope you appreciate that. Welcome. I know it's not much to look at. You're actually in my office, which, unlike most DC consultants or folks like that, I don't decorate behind me thinking, oh, it's going to look good on the screen. I actually decorate in front of me. So it looks nice for me. So maybe I'll show you that sooner or later. We'll be doing a few of those here this week. And we still managed to have a packed out show for you today. We're really grateful for you joining us here. And I hope you all had a happy Christmas, as happy as can possibly be. I know a lot of people still struggling to travel, being told they're not allowed to see their family members. And honestly, I'm very aware of the struggles that a lot of you are going through. That's why we're going to focus in on a lot of the lies that we continue to be told about the mask mandates, about what's going on in the rest of the country, about how the Chinese Communist Party seems to have had a whale of a time over the course of Christmas. We're working on a new story right now on the National Pulse, and Natalie Winters is going to be getting that up shortly, of one of these CCP YouTube starlets, propagandist for the Chinese Communist Party, who is now goading. Remember, you heard last week, or at least I hope you heard last week, about the diplomat, the Chinese Communist Party's media diplomat, Chen Weihua, goading, threatening even the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and indeed Brexit leader Nigel Farage. Well, this starlet, this new girl, has chimed in. She says, hey, racists, we don't even eat bats in China, so it couldn't have come from a bat. Hold on a minute. Because that was the CCP's line. Oops, there appears to have been somewhat of a slip in the narrative there as to where this all started from and why the United Kingdom, the United States, Western nations have just followed mindlessly, like lemmings, the Chinese Communist Party's prescriptions for how we deal with their virus. Lockdown, put your masks on, asymptomatic spread is a massive threat. And all the while, all of the scientists, the experts, the people who are supposedly at the tops of their fields here in the Western world, where medical science is far beyond anything else that there is on planet Earth, well, they followed the Chinese Communist Party. They followed the CCP line. They were basically this close from welding our doors shut. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the United Kingdom in the last week. I spoke with my parents yesterday, who are still there in London under Tier 4 restrictions. And honestly, the government may well have welded their doors shut. Such is the tyrannical nature of these lockdowns. You may not leave your home for fear of persecution and prosecution by the state, to have the police knocking on your doors saying, did you go out for a non-essential trip? Well, what's non-essential? And it changes day on day. There's also a lot to talk about right now regarding where the president stands and the disappointment. I won't hedge here, the disappointment that so many of us are feeling in the face of this capitulation to the swamp. What looks like it anyway. What are the details behind that? Is there some 4D, 5D, 6,000 dimensional chess going on here? It doesn't seem like it. For the people I speak to, and I know that the regular audience to the show knows I speak to the people in the know, nobody can give me and offer me an explanation bar that, hey, Lindsey Graham convinced him that it was a good thing to do. And Mark Meadows is already looking for office space on K Street. And Pat Cipolloni's driving his Lamborghini to the West Wing today. I'm not exaggerating. These are the rationale and the reasons that we're given behind the scenes, and I like to let you in on that as to what's going on right now. In other words, everyone around the President of the United States, the President wants to fight, but everyone around the President of the United States just doesn't have it in them. Why would they? We know who these people are. We know where they came from. We know who they endorsed. We know who they really wanted to be president. Marco Rubio, others like that, Carly Fiorina. So why are we surprised that these people are now turning their backs on the president when he and the country needs them the most? We'll be talking to Jack Posobiec about that very shortly. We'll be talking to Alana Goodman of the Washington Free Beacon, who's just now broken a bombshell story about the Georgia Senate race, specifically about one candidate, would-be Senator Warnock. We'll also be speaking with Jerome Riviere. Jerome is a member of the European Parliament. We'll be discussing the latest as it pertains to Brexit. You may have heard over the Christmas break, a Brexit deal was done between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And Jerome Riviere will join us to discuss that very shortly. Coming up next, don't go anywhere, Jack Posobiec joins us. We'll talk about all of these things. We'll be back with more National Pulse. All right, welcome back to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com. Got some great stories up on the site for you. Head on over, thenationalpulse.com. And if you want support our work, go to fundrealnews.com. As we enter the new year and fight against the fake news media, we're going to need every bit of support that we can get to continue growing. We're going to hit about 10 million page views this month. So I want to thank the audience out there who comes to the site every day, repeatedly, watching for the breaking news, watching for our long-form investigations. We're doing a few more because Joe Biden has just announced his new incoming digital team. And I say incoming with my tongue firmly lodged in my cheek. But we're going to be looking through who these people are, what their backgrounds are, where they've worked, because enough of the so-called transition team have already been found to have worked for and lobbied with the Chinese Communist Party. It would very much be surprising to me if more of these names don't show up. Speaking of the B word, Biden is supposed to be giving a press conference later on today. We'll bring you any breaking news from that as we get it. And I also want to make comment very quickly on this breaking news that Congressman Louis Gohmert appears to be suing Vice President Mike Pence, because as you know, the 6th of January is a very big date. It's the date that the President of the Senate, i.e. Vice President Mike Pence, is supposed to certify the election in person. And I don't think it's a hostile lawsuit. It's a lawsuit aimed at providing the Vice President and justifying the Vice President's power in that regard. So let's start there with our guest, Jack Posobiec, senior reporter at One America News. Jack, welcome back to the show. Looking, I would say, better than me today, smarter than I am today. What do you think?
For once, I've done it. For once, I've done it. Pulled it off.
What do you think about the 6th of January? Are people getting their hopes up too high over this? Is there anything that can come?
Well, what I have heard, actually, and I've got to return a few phone calls about this, is that at least from the grassroots perspective, that people are planning to come to Washington, D.C., despite the cold, despite the distance. In some cases, people are planning to come from as far as California. People are coming from out of the country. They want to go there to make their voices heard. People believe that because, and again, we don't need to prove this, we know that various states changed their laws, changed the way that our elections are held. They ran things in a way that's never been done in American history. Don't try to tell us that you haven't. Remember, Jonathan Swan was trying to say that to the president, but he obviously wasn't informed about what was actually going on in the states. And so people want to make their voices heard the same way the people in Belarus have been making their voices heard for half a year now and are constantly paraded by international media for contesting an election, right, in Belarus. Yet when the people of America do it, you look how the media responds. Well, I think that people in a free society ought to have the opportunity to do so, and that peaceful assembly is a major part of a free society. I think that's what we're going to see on January 6th. As far as to whether or not there'll be any legal theatrics going on in the U.S. Senate vis-a-vis Mike Pence, the bottom line I've heard is not so much with Pence, but it sounds like Mo Brooks is getting a good head of steam in the House, and I would be surprised if he can't find at least one senator to go along with him. Certainly, I guess it depends on what happens in Georgia the day before.
Yeah, I think that's right. And speaking of Georgia, there is some breaking news. We actually have Alana Goodman joining us, set to join us on the show. She's on the road doing this exclusive reporting. What do we know? What's the latest about Alana, her breaking story, Warnock, and these child abuse allegations that almost don't bear repeating, Jack? They sound so sick to me.
Right. And it is really disgusting. But if you look at the reporting that's come out before when it comes to this, so this was a church camp that was run by Warnock. Before he moved down to the church that he now runs in Atlanta, he actually was the pastor of a church up in the Baltimore area. And then in the sort of Baltimore, I believe it was Baltimore County, it was north of the city. He used to run a summer camp there for kids. Now, this summer camp, we know at one point it was shut down amidst a state health inspection. They came in there, the health department. Then at one point, they were investigating. The police were actually investigating this camp for abuse allegations. Yet it was that point that Warnock, the reverend and the overall director of all this church, was arrested for obstruction. And now he's come out and said, oh, well, I just wanted the kids to have representation. I was just trying to protect the interests of counselors, et cetera. Yet if you actually dig into the documents from the Maryland Department of Health, as I've done, you can see, and I'm sure Alana has done this as well, she's fantastic in this area, that you can see there was a settlement reached between this camp and between the state, allowing them to open back up after they had pulled their certification. However, the director of the camp had to step down, and there were several counselors, I don't remember the names off the top of my head, but a couple of counselors, teenagers, college kids, this type, that had to leave the camp. They were no longer allowed to be associated with this camp. Yet there wasn't any details as to what exactly it was. So we're trying to read between the lines and think, okay, these counselors must have had something happen, and it happened on this director's watch. Yet they were able to massage this report. And of course, he got this high-powered lawyer to represent him in order to get the settlement and allow the camp to reopen. Well, what's come out now is one of the children, a former attendee, he's 30 now, has come forward and is telling about the abuse. He is confirming that it was child abuse that took place at this camp. At one point, I guess the top line of it is that he had an issue. He's 12 years old. He had an issue with wetting the bed. And so the counselors, in order to get back at him for this, they forced him to sleep outside, not outside in a tent, not outside in, some sort of, area by himself. No, just literally outside. And then at some points, and these are his words again, coming forward years later, this happened about 18 years ago, saying that there was a bucket that the kids would use whenever a bathroom wasn't around. So first of all, no wonder they were under investigation by the Department of Health. You don't have bathrooms for your kids. And that counselors actually threw the contents of this bucket on him.
It's extreme. Jack, we'll get to more details in the next segment here. Stick around. We're going to go to a quick break. Jack Posobiec, National Pulse here on Build America's News Bureau. Well, it's the lead story at the Washington Free Beacon website, which is at freebeacon.com. The headline is Camper Recounts Abuse at Warnock Church Camp. Reading from their headline here, Anthony Washington, now 30, tells the Washington Free Beacon counselors tossed urine on him, forced him to sleep outside. This was while the Reverend Raphael Warnock was overseeing, in charge of that camp. Now, of course, wants to be a U.S. Senator for Georgia. I want to bring Jack Posobiec, One American News, back in on the conversation here. Jack, it's not the kind of routine kind of sexual harassment thing that we've seen come up every time, almost every election now, every special election, every Supreme Court nominee, you name it. This is a very particular kind of disgusting scandal that we're hearing about here. And I was wondering why we haven't heard about it earlier, because as I'm made aware from yourself and several other people, that local media in Georgia has actually known about this stuff for quite some time and has refused to report on it, Jack.
Yeah, it really is amazing what's going on. So I've said that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is the worst major city newspaper in the United States, and I actually do think that they're worse than the New York Times. They don't have the reach of the New York Times, but they're actually worse. There's a child abuse organization, by the way, that dug up the story from the Baltimore Sun about Warnock's arrest in 2002. Following that, it went viral. I tweeted it out. Tom Cotton tweeted it out. They then went back and docked the guy who runs the child abuse organization and the fact that he had donated to Tom Cotton and other people over the years, rather than actually deal with the story itself. There's no interest whatsoever from the quote unquote journalists at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to actually dig into what was going on with this child abuse situation. Why was Warnock arrested? Why was he obstructing the investigation? Why was the camp itself shut down? Their certification was pulled. People were asked to leave. There's this whole cloud over the whole thing. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you would think that would drive any news organization, right, regardless of politics, right? There's clearly a story there. And isn't the idea of journalism digging into things, people's pasts, stuff that they've tried to cover up, actions that they committed, deeds that they've committed? We're not even talking about this huge bombshell video that came out last week of his wife. Remember, his then wife, they hadn't even finalized their divorce, earlier this year, going to police, and we have the body cam footage of her accusing him of domestic abuse, right? Domestic assault. So we've got multiple people now that have come forward, one that came forward to police back in March. We've got another person coming forward talking about abuse at this camp. There's a culture of abuse that seems to follow Raphael Warnock. And yet the Atlanta Journal-Constitution doesn't seem to care about this. All they want to do is talk about his videos with his puppy dog and talk about how that makes him look likable. I'm not even joking. He literally has ads with a puppy dog.
Yeah, Jack, it's interesting when there's an allegation made about I would say like this. There really hasn't been much like this, but when there's a serious and depraved allegation against somebody on the political right, and it's just that the conservative media tends to run towards the story to try and figure out what really happened, provide extra context and extra details that perhaps the establishment media doesn't run. But local media in Georgia, as you say, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, don't seem to be running towards the story to debunk it, just kind of ignoring it, hoping people don't realize that that's what's going on there. And I just wonder whether or not, I mean, this is another Hunter Biden hard drive situation that we've got here, whereas the media didn't cover this on the run up to the national presidential election, and very few people as a result really got to hear the gory details of what was on Hunter's hard drive. How will the people of Georgia, without their main largest consumed media organizations in town? I mean, I get that, there will be people in Georgia listening to Real America's Voice, and that there are people in Georgia watching One American News, and there are people reading the National Pulse, but primarily the largest audiences still belong to the establishment brands. So are we looking at another hard drive from hell here and a major cover-up?
We absolutely are looking at this. So the media has been covering this up for his entire campaign. Remember, this primary started, he announced for this all the way back in 2019. So they could have been easily looking into this and looking it up from that very moment. They didn't do that. I wouldn't be surprised. They actually mentioned at one point that one of his Democrat primary opponents brought this up to the AJC, but they passed on the story during the Democrat primary. So this isn't even something that's like, oh, conservatives and Republicans are the ones coming up with it. No, Democrats were the ones that originally pitched the story, and they canned it because they said something about, oh, we thought there was a problem with the source. There's no problem with the source. It's the Baltimore Sun, right? You can go look at it. Now, I may have issues with the Baltimore Sun, but at least they did run the story, right? And you can go to the primary source documents from the Maryland Department of Health as well. I'm sure if you even wanted to do a random act of journalism, you could probably find the actual police officers, if they're still on, maybe they're retired now, that were involved in this investigation, be willing to talk about it off the record possibly. That's journalism. These are the tools of journalism.
Has Reverend Warnock said anything about this? I know this dropped an hour or so ago, maybe 2 hours ago now. Has the Warnock camp came out and said anything about the? I mean, these are some extraordinary allegations about the treatment of children in a camp that was under Reverend Warnock's control.
He may have had some foreknowledge that this was coming out. He may have been tipped off a little bit because yesterday afternoon he did post a tweet saying, "We told you the smears and lies were coming. Millions of dollars pouring in to run false attack ads against me. But I know Georgians will see these ads for what they are." And of course, there's a video of him with his little puppy dog again. It's almost bizarre. It's almost pathological the way that he won't even explain what's going on here. These aren't Republican claims, right? This is someone who was a 12-year-old boy who's come forward and is talking about abuse. A family that, by the way, received a settlement from the camp.
Here's what you and I need to do. We need to start a new website, just a stack of links, and we're going to call the website The Memory Hole. And every single thing that the mainstream media refuses to cover or that people don't address, we're going to call it The Memory Hole, right? Because this is what's happening nowadays. I tweeted earlier, right? Nobody's ever tried to remake an issue of 1984 as a movie or anything. And I believe that's because we're living it. You know, they turn it into a live action thing instead. Jack Posobiec, we've got to bounce One American News. Make sure you follow Jack Posobiec. He's on all the platforms. I want to thank him again for joining us here. Up next, Jerome Riviere, member of the European Parliament. Stick around, more details from across the pond, and then back here with Alana Good. Well, why does Raheem look so comfortable and cozy and casual today? Well, that's because we embrace the Christmas period. We embrace the whole period between now and the end of Epiphany, and allowing people to spend as much time with as they can, especially this year, with their families and friends, and to sort out what we need to sort out at the end of the year and come back rejuvenated and refreshed. And obviously we have the War Room shows in the morning, and we have so many different operations taking place here on Real America's Voice, all the different shows across the day, everything that's going on in terms of the growth of this network between Denver and Washington, D.C. and Palm Beach and all the other places that we have studios around the country, and indeed growing beyond that. Then, of course, we have the National Pulse and the operation that we have there. We have Natalie Winters flying all over the place, seeing her family. You've got me stuck here on Capitol Hill, Skyping with my family overseas in London. So we've got a lot of moving parts, and the best way to do the shows this week is for me to be comfy, cozy, and casual at home. So welcome into my own little war room right here, which is my office. I'll show you. It's not all blank walls, believe me. I'll show you around the place at some point, but I had to rush to put all of this together today to make sure that we could bring you a live show, because there is so much breaking news going on right now. You heard there from Jack Posobiec about what's taking place in Georgia right now. And honestly, like I say, I'm not one of these people who kind of holds the information very close and deploys it strategically to you guys. I want you guys to know what I know when I know it. As soon as I can verify some information, as soon as I get nuggets of information, I try and relay that to you as quickly as possible. It could be on this show, it could be on the War Room, it could be via the National Pulse website, it could be on my Twitter feed. Make sure you're paying attention in somebody else's Twitter feed, who you're going to want to pay attention to, is our next guest, Jerome Riviere. Before I bring Jerome in, I just want to close that thought off by talking about what's happening in Georgia right now. And the calls I'm getting, even from the most optimistic, fight-heavy people in that, is that the steel is so far entrenched right now, and the Republicans at a local level did so little for so long that, as I say, even the most optimistic fighters I know on the ground in Georgia are telling me, you know what, I don't see how it could possibly happen. Well, we're going to be paying very close attention to that. I am not a pessimist by any stretch of the imagination. We'll be paying very close attention to it and watching the fight and bringing you the latest every day as we get it. Let's bring another fighter into this. Jerome Riviere is a member of the European Parliament. And Jerome, it appeared over the course of the last week. By the way, we got some amazing feedback on your Boxing Day appearance on the War Room. People were really jazzed to hear your perspective on the American Constitution, the longevity of the American Constitution versus, the 15th Republic or whatever it is that you're on in France.
Five, it's already a lot.
And I encourage the audience, if you didn't manage to see that 26th of December, we call Boxing Day special, make sure you go ahead and check that out. It's on YouTube, it's on Rumble. Jerome, we got news of a Brexit deal. We were hurtling towards this kind of idea of a no-deal Brexit or a hard Brexit, the idea that Britain would sever all ties with the European Union without measures in place that could continue on a trading relationship, to manage the fisheries. And the reason I always tell the American audience this is so important is because what happened here in 2016, what continues to happen with the national populist movement, is inextricably linked between what happened in Brexit and what's happening in France right now as well. So just quickly, give us your take on what we've learned about this so-called Brexit deal.
Yeah, you have two things to take into account. First of all, I'm French, proud to be French. Therefore, I had in mind that we needed a good deal for the fishermen. That's a key issue. And to Americans, it might be a little off, but the waters that have the most fish on the European shores are the British waters. So this is where a lot of fishermen are going in order to be able to make some good catches. What you have to keep in mind that the people that are buying those fishes are, of course, some people in Great Britain, but there is a huge market in Europe. So there is some kind of balance that could be found. And as a French member of the European Parliament, I was hoping we would find some kind of deal with the British in order to maintain access for the French fishermen to the British waters. And I understand that the British wants to make sure that they get not ripped off. And I think that we have reached a proper deal for 5 years. 5 years from now, there will be some amount to be paid by the French fishermen or any other type of fisherman that comes in the British waters. And we'll see at that time what we do, if we still accept the product coming from Britain without any specific toll, or if we tell them, look, because we need to pay something when we fish in your water, you need to pay when you export. But I think this was fair. The rest, I'm surprised in a positive way by the way Boris Johnson handled everything, because he remained strong. For a while, I believed that he was going to be weak and, in fact, agree to the terms of the European Union, which were terms in which they were being tougher with Great Britain than they would be with Vietnam. And they were asking of the United Kingdom more concession than they were asking of Vietnam, which is a communist country far, far, far away from France. So Boris Johnson held quite tough, and I think it's a tribute to the UKIP movement and to Nigel Farage, because basically he's the one who brought this Brexit deal. I like Nigel very much. I think he did a great job. He even agreed to sabotage his own political career in order to do the good for his country. So you don't see that very often. So I think we should remember that he's the one who did that, and I think Boris Johnson played it pretty well. On our part, I'm happy that the Brexit is done, because it shows that there is a life out of the European Union. And again, a quick reminder for the people that are listening. I'm a member of Marine Le Pen party. I'm not at all against Europe, but I don't like European Union. European Union is a momentum that began in 1992 that transform Europe in a political type of institution instead of being just a free and fair trade area.
Jerome, just bear with us one moment. We're going to take a quick break here. We want to hold you over to the next segment to tell us more about that, where your party stands in terms of the European Union and the European Union membership question as well. Very important as well, because don't forget, as a result of Brexit, the United Kingdom and the United States should be at least negotiating some sort of trade deal. That's what a second Trump term would have been doing. Let's see if an incoming Biden administration, if that turns out to be the case, prioritizes the same stuff. Back in a second. And as they soup up the Real America's Voice studios downtown Washington, D.C., welcome to my lair here on Capitol Hill. Raheem Kassam for Real America's Voice and the nationalpulse.com. We've got some great stories going up on the site later on today and tomorrow morning. We're keeping our foot on the accelerator as much as we can during this Christmas and New Year period. And then, of course, hitting the new year running. Want to bring Jerome Riviere, member of the European Parliament, back into the conversation here. We were talking about Brexit, the Brexit deal. And Jerome, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, I think some people don't quite necessarily understand why, you've got an Englishman and a Frenchman on an American television network talking about fish, right? But in a lot of ways, you look at the fisheries industries in both the Brexit Britain and in France, and these are huge industries that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs in turn rely on, a massive part of gross domestic product, a massive part of our food security as nations as well. And so for those that don't understand, I just wanted to clarify why fish is such an important thing for the United Kingdom and indeed for France, and why the European Union as well uses that as such a leverage point in these negotiations. But Jerome, as you said, the Brexit negotiations look to have taken place successfully. There does appear to have been a compromise on both sides. A very merry Brexmas was had by all. And I think we can all move on now to the next phase of this thing. So let me ask you this. I know that the Rassemblement National, your party in France, isn't what we would define, or at least as I would define, as a Eurosceptic party, but you are skeptical of the European Union's growth expansion. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I'm skeptical. We are skeptical of the political agenda. We agreed to be inside a European community that was set up in order to have good trades. It enriched us. It was really a good thing until 1992, when some people decided to make it some kind of a nation. They tried to build it as a nation, which is not the purpose of this European Union. And I don't want to be the Grinch who doesn't like Christmas, and I like this Brexit deal. But you have to notice that this deal was struck between the United Kingdom and the European Commission. The European Parliament, I'm a member of the European Parliament, should have been involved, and we should have approved this deal. Sure. But in fact, the deal is going to be entering into action on January 1st, and the European Parliament will not have approved it. So this is a symbol of what EU is. EU doesn't respect democracy, doesn't respect the member of the European Parliament. They don't care. So because I don't care that much about EU, it doesn't matter that much, because in the end, it's a good deal. But it shows how the European Commission really has this idea that they are master of everything, that they can decide on behalf of all those different nations, and that they don't care about democratic process. Should remind the people in the United States of quite a few things.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because effectively, what they've got there, what the European Commission is a building and trillions of dollars worth of a budget run by little European Anthony Fauci's, right? And I think the Americans
a little bit like USSR used to be run. A little bit like USSR used to be run. A big building with people you don't know, anonymous people, not elected people.
Exactly. Well, Jerome, I know there's an issue very close to your heart here as well that we've covered on the National Pulse today as well. I noticed that you were sharing this out from a French magazine. I think it was Valeurs Actuelles that you shared it from, and we covered it in English as well, just to give the world an understanding, the English-speaking world, an understanding of what's taking place in your. I mean, I'll say the same about mine, by the way, once great nation, but we intend to make them great again. Tell us about the Paris Opera.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. As you know, the French have a long tradition of opera that started in late 1600. The Opéra de Paris is one of the renowned opera places amongst other. But now we have the director of the Opéra de Paris, which a guy called Alexander Neff. He was a director, I think, in Santa Fe also at one point. He decided that he's going to strike some of the major classical operas in order to be more inclusive, because of a request by some Black Lives Matter people within the opera. And I'm telling you, Raheem, I am sick and tired of this BS. I really cannot stand this anymore. France has never been a country that enforced any segregation. These people calling themselves Black Lives Matters, 90% of them are white people. They don't feel comfortable with themselves. They don't like their civilization, their problem. But a humongous majority of French people are happy with their civilization. We're happy with our history. We're proud of our history. And we want to make this history live for our children, our grandchildren. I have nothing against some new opera be made in order to make some, any story about whatever. But the Lac des Cygnes, the Casse-Noisette, which is a nutcracker, or La Bayadère, which are the three opera that are going to be struck from the agenda of the Opéra de Paris, are classical opera that we want to be performed. And this tendency of a few people to always denigrate our civilization is unbearable. And I will give you an example because it comes a few days after Christmas. And on Christmas Day, President Macron never wished the French people a Merry Christmas. He is one of the only world leaders who did not say a word. He wishes a nice iftar to the Muslims. He wishes every single holidays for any other religion. But France, with a majority of Christian Catholic, a vast majority of Christian Catholic, he did not say a word about Christmas. It shows how these people are trying to destroy our civilization. The fact that he's ashamed, the fact that he has a problem with himself, it should not affect us. And this is something that we have to say stop. And this is what Rassemblement National has been saying. We never were a segregated country, but we are not going to accept anything that which is reverse segregation. A last example, if I have a minute, because as you can see, it's something that passionates me. 30 seconds. The next James Bond. You cannot do a blackface because it's called cultural appropriation. I'm sorry. Ian Fleming decided and wrote a book about an English gentleman being at the service of Her Majesty the Queen. He never wrote a book about a young black lady being this spy. So this is cultural appropriation the other way around. So enough is enough. And this is my wishes for 2021.
I agree. Jerome Riviere, member of the European Parliament. Thank you for saying it and for saying it so very, very clearly. We'll be back with a lot of good news. Well, it's all locked back down here in Washington, D.C. No dining indoors. And by the way, Christmas Eve, per proclamation of Mayor Muriel Bowser, is now Anthony Fauci Day. I'm not joking. I don't have to make jokes on this show because reality is just that bizarre nowadays. So thank you for joining us here and all of your support, sharing these clips, these stories from the nationalpulse.com. But I want to, and I don't do this very often, send you over to a different website, if I may. It's the freebeacon.com. It's just freebeacon.com. and the lead story, the author of which is joining us now, Alana Goodman, senior investigative reporter for the Washington Free Beacon, previously at the Washington Examiner, the Daily Mail. It's written for Commentary Magazine, the New York Post. Alana is somewhat of an investigative news veteran in this town now, albeit as young as she still remains. Alana, thank you for joining us here. This story that you've got up as the lead on the site, going hyper viral across the internet right now, is harrowing, disgusting, depraved, and it pertains to the Senate races in Georgia. Tell us more.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Raheem. So this is about a camp where that Raphael Warnock was running back when he was a pastor in Baltimore. This was a rural sleepaway camp for inner city kids, and this was in the early 2000s. So there were several investigations into potential child abuse at this camp at the time when Warnock was running it. We have had difficulty getting information on this, what the details of that abuse actually was, and I was able to speak to a camper who had sued the camp at the time, and he discussed what had happened to him, and there was urine allegedly thrown on him by counselors. He was forced to sleep outside on the ground as a punishment by himself when he was 12 years old. And so these are definitely disturbing allegations that Raphael Warnock will need to weigh in on.
Just some of the details in this stuff is extraordinary. I think people need to read it to get a full grip of how widespread this was. In terms of when you heard about this story, when you were taking this witness statement, was there anything that sort of told you that, all of this could have easily happened without Raphael Warnock knowing about it?
Well, we don't know exactly what Warnock knew in this situation, but I will say he was on this lawsuit. So when this camper sued the camp, his family sued the camp farthest out in Maryland. They sued the church, and they sued Raphael Warnock directly. He was a defendant in this case. This lawsuit went on for 2 years. It was, according to the camper, it was settled financially. And so, his name is on the lawsuit as a defendant. So he at least was as involved in that. I mean, I think that he needs to come forward and talk about exactly what he knew and when he knew it.
Right, but he's not appearing to do that. In fact, yesterday, I believe Raphael Warnock tweeted that the smear merchants and the millions of dollars that are being spent against him to peddle lies. I mean, Alana, you wrote this story. He's calling you a liar. He's calling you a smear merchant. I mean, you are probably the closest thing to a real reporter left in Washington, D.C. now. How do you even go about addressing something like that, or do you not respond to something like that, especially when the local media appears to have known about this for so long and not bothered to do what you've done, which is actually go and interview some of the victims?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is common to hear from politicians when they're unhappy with some news coverage. But this is a serious case. This is an abuse case. It was involving child abuse at the camp, and so it wasn't. This isn't something like with financial impropriety or something like that. This involves children and very serious allegations here. And so I don't think that he can continue to be silent on this. I think that he needs to come forward and address it. And I mean, I agree with you. I think it's been surprising that there just hasn't been a lot of coverage of this story. The Georgia race is usually important. There's a lot of media attention on the race generally, but in terms of Warnock's background, there hasn't been much coverage at all.
Alana, is there more to come on this? Will you be doing any further reporting? What's next for you on the Georgia election beat?
Yeah, we're going to keep looking into this story, and so hopefully dig up some more information on it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for doing that and bringing us real news. Alana Goodman, make sure you're checking out freebeacon.com. Following Alana. Alana, what's your social media?
It's at Alana Goodman on Twitter.
at Alana, ALANA Goodman on Twitter. Alana Goodman, thank you again for joining us here on the National Pulse.
Thanks, Raheem.
Some of the details I'll tell you. I mean, I'm reading this story. It's in front of me right now, and one of the victims here, Anthony Washington, who was 12 years old at the time. I'm going to read from this for you directly. Washington expressed surprise when he was told Warnock is currently running for U.S. Senate in Georgia. Quote, "I don't think nobody like Warnock should be running for damn Senate nowhere, running a camp like that," he told the Free Beacon. "He should not be running for government." Let me tell you something. These people, I mean, this isn't, to me, this is nothing like when you see the stories being told, the sexual allegation stories after 40 years of someone in a dressing room somewhere who kind of recalls something and then goes on a media tour to sell a book. I mean, Anthony Washington, who's the victim in here, says specifically, I don't like talking about this stuff. I don't want to talk about this stuff. And credit to Alana Goodman for convincing Mr. Washington to come out with his story there. So we have time for today. I want to make sure you stick around. David Brody is up next, the water cooler. We've got great programming all day long on Real America's Voice. Great news stories and investigations, things that aren't being covered over at thenationalpulse.com as well. That story about the Paris, about Biden and his advisors, their links to the Chinese Communist Party. We've got more stories coming soon on, our favorite Hillary Clinton, working on a whole bunch of things. In the meantime, I want to thank you for all your support. Head on over to thenationalpulse.com/support. If you can, $5, $10, support our work. In the meantime, have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m.